So, my existence causes a general confusion, and I don't think it should. I want us to get to a time where it makes total sense for someone to get a PhD in astrophysics and then immediately become an artist. Not only would I get fewer funny looks, but more importantly, it would mark a realization in how interconnected the well-being of humanity is with our understanding of the cosmos. A shift in which we understand that artists and scientists need to be in the same room more often. It's only been in the past century that art and science have been so aggressively siloed. The benefits of leaving these disciplines blurred can be seen in the profound contributions of figures from Kepler and Da Vinci to Rachel Carson and Carl Sagan. Today, we have people like Tracy Day, Nancy Kowalak, and Janna Levin all doing incredible work to bring together these fields. I'm sure there's already a TED Talk out there that explains how scientists need to be creative to solve problems and that many artists are analytically experimenting for their work. But I've seen a few things get lost in translation, having spent time in both worlds. So today I'd like to share two stories from my journeys along this bridge between art and science. So our first story begins in Ithaca, New York, Cornell University, a beautiful place to sit inside all day and write computer code. But luckily, the code is pretty interesting. So my PhD involved running and designing climate simulations in the search for life. We would use powerful computers to model the atmospheres of hypothetical planets outside our solar system and see which ones could contain life. I would model planets around red stars and blue stars, each with different atmospheres, some covered in grassy fields, others with ocean or desert. And actually, sometimes in Ithaca, it would get so cold that if we had that temperature on our model, it would be considered uninhabitable. And so it's all kinds of data like this that just painted thousands of portraits in my head of these possible worlds, and I wanted a way to visualize them. So getting inspired by the photorealistic work coming out of these big movie studios, I used their tools with as many physically real calculations as I could to make these renders. So as my studies go on, I'm getting better at modeling planets both scientifically and artistically, and it's providing real value to our team. We were able to visualize places that we'd never get to see, bringing together our disconnected hypotheses in ways that would spark new scientific questions. This was until one project came along that made me question the artistic freedom I had taken for granted while working in theory. So this time, a new planet is discovered, one that's actually out there, and I have to model it, figure out if it can support life. And all I have is three measurements: its mass, how much light it gets, and the type of star that it orbits. And after hundreds of simulations, we find that under very specific conditions, in the realm of physical possibility, there was the potential for this planet to have liquid water on its surface. Maybe. But even this is exciting news because something common in all life is the need for liquid water. So as I'm doing the scientific modeling, I'm also doing this visualization, and I'm using oceans and rivers and clouds, really going all out. Eventually, the discovery is released along with my art, and it's getting some public attention. And I'm watching this narrative unfold for this planet that I have intimate knowledge of, both as its scientist and artist. And I realized that I kind of failed. So the science and the art were both fine. They were both done to a very high standard in their own. But seeing how they were interconnected firsthand, only I had that big picture view of how they interacted. And it was kind of unsettling. It hit me just how little the visualization does to express the experience of our science properly. Not only did I fail to capture the limited information of the discovery and the uncertainty in our modeling, but I fell right into this pitfall of letting science put on a face for the public, only showing a narrow slice that would get the most attention, relegating the artwork to an add-on, an afterthought. I didn't yet realize how important that visualization was in the way our discovery entered the public consciousness and was used by other scientists. An image like this creates a really strong first impression, one that anyone, even scientists, has to overcome to engage with that science. What really bugged me, though, was that if I felt this way about my tiny little glimpse behind the scenes, what is really going on when we see images of black holes Or have our reality shifted by predictions of alien life? Or when we see images from the Hubble and James Webb Space Telescope? So, how would our worldview be different if scientific art were more honest? How responsible have scientists been about explaining reality to us through the images and stories they help produce? And as an artist, how could I make art with more care and that same level of responsibility? So coming back to this image, how could I maybe include more of that uncertainty in the simulation? Maybe make it more abstract or stylized? But that's not really the full picture behind this image. Could I also include the sleepless nights spent debugging code? What about the friendships forged over 30-hour problem sets? What about the scarring imposter syndrome when you fail your qualifying exam for the first time? Could I also include the feeling of finding something out about the universe that no one else knows, and you just can't wait to tell someone? So look at this image and ask yourself, does it capture the feeling of running a climate simulation written in Fortran from the 90s while sitting on a sink in a rest stop bathroom in North Dakota for the outlet? I don't think so. Trust me, I know. Could it also include the feeling of watching multiple friends get pushed away from their dreams by how toxic academia can get? So I didn't have the means to properly process all this in the midst of the project, but I knew that the design of how science was experienced needed to be examined. And one of my biggest pet peeves, amplified by this ideas industry of today, is when an expert in one field assumes confidence in a completely different field. So approaching 10 years of higher education, what are two more? I applied to art school. I didn't want to assume. I wanted to actually learn what it meant to be a cultural communicator, a designer of experiences. And this is sort of when the funny looks started. But I kind of took it as a good sign, because the system of meaning around me felt so broken that I needed to do something it was telling me not to do. So I arrived at the Rhode Island School of Design, trying to see if training as an artist can help me better understand our connection to science. And I wasn't entirely sure that art would be able to do it. If I wanted art for science to be more like conceptual art, where the ideas take priority, why not just talk or write about these connections? And I think I found my answer in my second year from a very unexpected project involving this rock from space. That brings us to our second story. So over the course of several evenings in the fall of 2021, without telling anyone, I walked around the fourth floor studios of the CIT building, slowly filing down this 4.5 billion year old meteorite into dust. This is all that's left. The dust I set loose fell to the ground, and from there I can only guess at where else it traveled. The sink, the trash, people's shoes, down the elevator, out into the park across the street. Maybe it became part of someone else's work. The last time these freshly exposed grains of nickel and iron had seen light was in the long since dissipated cosmic nursery where our sun was being born. The microscopic flecks of primordial metal were never noticed for what they were, swept off of tables and mixed up with the sawdust, dog hair, and plastic of others making and destroying. As a scientist and an MFA student in this newfound struggle to find the point of making art, this was as much an experiment as it was a performance. A mix of questions and actions to disentangle where significance originates and disintegrates. How minimal can art be? When does an object become special or worthless? So let's break down what this object even is. This meteorite began in a cloud of dust as old as the solar system itself. It quickly collapsed into a solid body that orbited the sun for billions of years before deflecting towards Earth and making its way through atmosphere and collectors to me. I then proceeded to disassociate its significance by making it unrecognizable, treated just like the rest of the dust on the floor. It's a unique and simple story. It came from space is really all you need for this rock to feel 1,000 times more special than an old paperclip. But the iron in this paperclip is atomically identical to that in the meteorite. It began in the same cloud of dust around our newborn sun, but instead of drifting unaltered, it violently collapsed in a cosmic eye blink in the right place at the right time to build a world with water, atmosphere, and life. For billions of years, the iron is mixing under Earth's crust and oceans in a way that prevents the buildup of oxygen in our atmosphere. This prevents life from flourishing beyond single cells. Over eons, that iron oxidizes and subducts and eventually relinquishes the atmosphere for more complex life to emerge. After just a few alterations, that life learns to refine metal and decides that paperclips are useful in quantities so large that when they fall to the ground, they can be forgotten. So is this story of the paperclip too obscure for its significance to be realized? Is it just because this story is too common? It's the same story for every bit of iron in this room, with the exception of the meteorite. So with this explanation of my performance, you may feel a newfound sense of the connection between story and significance, that meaning and value come from the narrative we tell, not the object itself. So what was the point of actually grinding up the meteorite and losing part of it, if I could just explain that to you? Well, this was the original experiment, to find the meaning of the artifact in my conceptual art. What I realized was that the action was a tangible validation of the concept, that it could work. The very act of grinding down this shooting star validated its insignificance to me. Seeing it stepped on and swept away, as an artist, I realized I was making to confirm the viability of this idea to exist as a physical metaphor. The project proceeded as expected, but as a scientist, expectation is not a replacement for reality. Observing firsthand the ease of dirt making with such a prized object felt parallel to the confirmation of a scientific hypothesis. And in this way, the conceptual artist becomes a sort of experimental philosopher. And the artifacts they're making aren't the embodiment of the concept, but the instruments to test it. So between these two stories and everything that happened between them, I've begun to realize that to make a real difference in reality, you need scientists. But to make a real difference in scientists, you need artists. Thoughtful creatives that are designing how science is experienced and validating our feelings about its results. How the science is communicated, who is telling the story, even down to the color map you're choosing to represent your data, are all subjective choices that have a real impact. Whether done thoughtfully or not, these choices shape what scientists and the public are inspired by, get motivated to study, find interesting to fund, and ultimately how we decide what questions are valuable to humanity. Now, I became a scientist to understand the universe around me, and I'm doing the same thing as an artist. I've studied where to look for the first evidence of life beyond our solar system, and now I'm unraveling why the question, are we alone, is so important to us in the first place. I've calculated the distant edges of our cosmic horizon, and now I'm exploring the absurd dissonance of making a scientific discovery that is so far beyond our ability to internalize. I've debated the semantics of scientific concepts from quantum mechanics to why stars shine, and now I'm exploring the way that we can represent how much meaning language even contains. While the definitions of art and science can provide technical distinctions, when we think of them as the products of artists and scientists' behaviors, the differences become superficial. The way in which we unravel how science and art are connected can lead us to new discoveries. So if you're feeling inspired as an artist, I want you to go out and email a scientist. They'll either ghost you or they will explode with enthusiasm because of how interested someone is in their work. You belong on the front line of knowledge. The power you have in navigating us through the experience of science cannot be overstated. And to the scientists out there, apparently we can be super intimidating, so we can work on that, but what you can also do is engage with artists. Bring them into your research throughout the process, not just at the very end. If we bring these fields back together, I'm sure we will change the way we think about the universe. Thank you.